Thank you all very much, and Mr. Horowitz, thank you. I really appreciate what you have done. Do you have your team here with you? Would it be okay if they raise their hands? Is that all right?
Sure. If they're okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Thank you all. You have labored hard, and your work product is impressive. And I just want to thank you all for what you've done for the country. And Mr. Horowitz, I'm dying to hear from you, but I bet I haven't made 20 minutes of opening statements in a year, but I'm going to take a little bit longer to try to lay out what I think is before us as a nation. Crossfire Hurricane was probably the best name ever given to an investigation in the history of investigations, because I think that's what we wound up with, a crossfire and a hurricane. There's been a lot of media reports about your report before it was issued. And I remember reading all these headlines, lawful investigation with a few irregularities. Everything okay, low-level people kind of got off track. If that's what you get out of this report, you clearly didn't read it. If that's your takeaway, that this thing was lawfully predicated, and that's the main point, you missed the entire report. How do you get a headline like that? That's what you want it to be. You want it to be that and nothing more. And I can assure you, if this had been a Democratic president going through what President Trump had gone through, that would not have been the headline. The headline would be, the FBI takes law into its own hands. Biased agents cut corners, lie to court, ignore exoneration. So the first thing I want you to know is how the cake is baked here. And my goal is to make sure that people, when this is over, whether you like Trump, hate Trump, don't care about Trump, you look at this as more than a few irregularities. Because if this becomes a few irregularities in America, then God help us all. Now, the people that were in charge in this investigation were handpicked by Mr. McCabe, who's now CNN analyst, high up in the FBI, the #2 guy. The first question I will ask in a bit, is this the best of the best? Are these people normal representatives of the Department of Justice and the FBI? I hope you will say no, because I believe it to be no. And if I believed otherwise, I would be incredibly depressed. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to assume something for the sake of argument, that there was a lawful predicate to open up a counterintelligence investigation. And I want you to know the standard to open one up is about like that. And I also want you to know a counterintelligence investigation is not a criminal investigation. They're not trying to solve a crime. They're trying to stop foreign powers from interfering in America. That a counterintelligence investigation is designed to protect Americans from foreign influence. I want the American people to know there was an effort to affect Hillary Clinton's campaign by foreign actors. The FBI picked up that effort, they briefed her about it, and they were able to stop it. We will be receiving a defensive briefing tomorrow as a committee from the FBI to tell us all about what we should be watching for. And they may be some specific threats against us. I don't know. But I know they're going to brief us to protect us, not to surveil us. And here's what I want every American to know. From the time they opened up Crossfire Hurricane till this debacle was over, they never made any effort to brief Donald Trump about suspected problems within his campaign. They had one briefing talking about, you know, the Russians are out there, you better beware. Nothing about Carter Page, Nothing about Papadopoulos. Nothing about the other people that they thought might be working with the Russians. Why did they not tell him that? I hope you can give us an answer. Bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, a counterintelligence investigation is a good thing until it becomes a bad thing. Because it doesn't take much to open one. And the worst thing can happen is for people to open one up whose real purpose is not to protect an American, but to surveil them. Senator Feinstein found herself in a situation all of us may one day find ourselves in. A longtime employee was suspected of having ties to a foreign government. They informed her and she took appropriate action. How easy would it be for somebody to come into our campaigns as a volunteer? We really don't know who they are. You just appreciate any help you can get. How easy would it be for all of us to get caught up in this scenario? I hope all of us would appreciate, if you really believe there's somebody in my campaign working with a foreign power, please tell me so I can do something about it. Why didn't they tell Trump? We'll figure that out later, but I think it's a question that needs to be asked. So for a moment, let's assume that there was a lawful predicate to open up a counterintelligence investigation. What has been described as a few irregularities becomes a massive criminal conspiracy over time to defraud the FISA court, to illegally surveil an American citizen, and to keep an operation open against a sitting president of the United States, violating every norm known to the rule of law. Many of you are prosecutors. Many of you have been U.S. attorneys. Many of you have been defense attorneys. Trump's time will come and go. But I hope we understand that what happened here can never happen again. Because what happened here is not a few irregularities. What happened here is the system failed. People at the highest level of our government took the law in their own hands. And when I say defraud the FISA court, I mean it. To your team, you were able to uncover and discover abuse of power I never believed would actually exist in 2019. How bad is it? It was as if J. Edgar Hoover came back to life. The old FBI, the FBI that had a chip on its shoulder and wanted to intimidate people and find out what was going on in your life and the law be damned. Martin Luther King, and just fill in the names. So, who ran this thing? The people were handpicked by McCabe, the number 2 guy at the FBI. The supervisory agent, the Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, is Peter Strzok. He's a big player in all things Crossfire Hurricane. Lisa Page, you may have heard of her. Who was she? She was an FBI lawyer working for McCabe. These are 2 central characters in this debacle. Let me tell you a little bit about who these people are and where they're coming from. Thanks to a lot of hard work by people for Mr. Horowitz, the FBI, and others, here's what we know. Strzok, the frontline supervisor, February the 12th, 2016. Oh, he's, Trump, abysmal. I keep hoping the charade will end and people will just dump him. The problem then is that Rubio will likely lose to Cruz. I never quite made it, and I can understand why they would not consider me a serious candidate. The Republican Party is utter shambles. When was the last competitive ticket they offered? March 3rd, 2016. Page, God, Trump is a loathsome human. Strzok, oh my God, he's an idiot. And you know what? Newsrooms all over the country, people are nodding. This represents the attitude of a lot of people in America, and you can have that attitude, but you shouldn't be in the journalism business. You shouldn't be at the FBI. If you were in the military and you said anything like this about a commander-in-chief, you'd be charged with a crime. Remember the McChrystal debacle, where they had a barroom discussion with a reporter from the Rolling Stone? What's the takeaway? Don't go to a bar with a Rolling Stone reporter. They started talking about how they didn't like Joe Biden, and I was one of the first people to say that is out of bounds. You can have all the political opinions you want, but if you're an officer in the United States military, you will park those opinions and you will not speak ill of the commander-in-chief. But that obviously is not a rule at the FBI, Department of Justice. March 16, 2016. I cannot believe Donald Trump is likely to be actual serious candidate for president. July 16th, we're getting closer to when this thing opens. And wow, Donald Trump is an enormous douche. Again, a lot of people agree with that. Trump barely spoke, but the first thing out of his mouth was, we're going to win so big. The whole thing is like living in a bad dream. July the 19th, 2016. Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be. And a lot of people believe that. You're entitled to believe that, but you should not be an investigator. July the 30th, the investigation's open. And damn, this feels momentous about the investigation, because this matters. The others one did too, but that was to ensure we didn't F something up. This matters because this matters. So super glad to be on this voyage with you. I hope you understand what this voyage was about. August 8, 2016, 3 days before Strzok was named the frontline supervisor. He's not ever going to become president, right? Page to Strzok. Strzok, no, he won't. We'll stop it. These are the people in charge. August 15, 2016. I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk, that the American people will pick their president, is what they're saying. It's like an insurance policy. In the unlikely event you die before you're 40. August 26, 2016. Just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. People in charge. October 11, 2016. Currently fighting with Stu for the FISA. Stu was a lawyer who thought this thing was not on the up and up. Stood his ground until he couldn't stand it anymore. Eventually got run over. October the 19th. I'm all riled up. Trump is an effing idiot, is unable to provide a coherent answer. The New York Times probability numbers are dropping every day. I'm scared for our organization. November the 3rd, 2016. Oh my God, this is effing terrifying. Referencing an article entitled, "A Victory by Trump Remains Possible." November the 9th, 2016. Are you ever going to give out your calendars? Some kind of depressing. Maybe it should be the first meeting of the secret society. November the 13th. I bought all the president's men. I figure I needed to brush up on Watergate. November the 13th, 2016. Finally, two pages away from finishing all the president's men. Page to Strzok. Did you know the president resigns at the end? Strzok, what? God, that would be so lucky. May 18th, 2017. The date Page accepted a position on the special counsel's team. For me, in this case, I personally have a sense of unfinished business. I unleashed with MYE, whatever that means. Now I need to fix it and finish it. Strzok. Who gives a F one more assistant director or whoever, an investigation leading to impeachment. May 2017. You and I both know the odds are nothing. If I thought it was likely, I'd be there, no question. I hesitate in part just because of my gut sense and concern there's no big there. Talking about impeachment. May 22nd, 2017. I'm torn. I think, no, I'm more replaceable than you are in this. I'm the best for it, but there are others who can do it okay. You're different and more unique. This is yours. Talking to Page. All right. That's the frontline supervisor and the lawyer to McCabe. There's a guy named Kleinsmith who eventually alters an email from the CIA to the Department of Justice and FBI. And Mr. Horowitz's team found this out, and how they did it, I will never know. I'm jumping ahead here. But when you read this report, what they find is that a lawyer supervising the FISA process at the FBI, according to Mr. Horowitz, doctored an email from the CIA to the FBI, and he's going to be referred for criminal prosecution. Why is that important? Carter Page, who's been on the receiving end of all this, the foundation to believe he was a foreign agent comes from a dossier that we'll talk about in a minute. In that dossier provided by Christopher Steele, and we'll talk about him in a minute, they claim that Carter Page meets with 3 people known to be Russians, Russian agents, people associated with Russia. Carter Page, while being wiretapped by his government, says, I don't know 2 of these people, and to this day, there's no proof that he ever met 2 of those 3. The 3rd person, he says, yeah, I met him. I told the CIA about my meeting because I was a source for the CIA. So they would have you believe that Carter Page is working against our government, not with our government. So Carter Page in the summer of 2017 is trying to tell anybody and everybody, I was working with the CIA, I reported my contact with this person, and nobody believed him. The CIA had told the FBI it was true earlier, but it never made it through the system. Somebody got so rattled at the FBI, they asked Mr. Kleinsmith to check it out. He checks it out. He communicates with the CIA. Is Carter Page a source for you? In an email exchange, they say, yes, he is. What does Mr. Kleinsmith do? He alters the email to say, no, he's not. And you caught him. I don't know how you caught him, because you got to dig into this email chain. It would be like getting a lab report from the FBI. The fingerprints don't match, and the agent says they do. That's how bad this is. So now let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Kleinsmith, if I can find it. Can you get me the Kleinsmith stuff? All right, this is the lawyer supervising the FISA warrant process. The guy that altered this CIA email because he didn't want the court to know that Carter Page actually was a source. And why does that matter? Because if the court had known, then there's a lawful reason for Mr. Page to be talking to the Russian guy. He wasn't working against his country, he was working with his country, which undercuts the idea he's a foreign agent. That's why Kleinsmith lied, because he didn't want to stop this investigation. All right, this is after the election. I am so stressed about what I could have done differently the day after the election. I'm just devastated. I can't wait until I can leave today and just shut off the world for the next 4 days. I'm sure a lot of people felt that way after Trump got elected. Maybe still feel that way. But you shouldn't be in charge of supervising anything about Donald Trump if you feel that way. I just can't imagine the systematic disassembly of the progress we've made over the last 8 years. The Obama administration. The crazies won finally. This is the lawyer that they put in charge of supervising the warrant process. This is the Tea Party on steroids. And I'm sure there are newsrooms all over America saying, that's absolutely right. What is wrong with that? Oh, also, Pence is stupid. Whatever. This is what the guy's saying right after the election. And it's just hard not to feel like the FBI caused some of this. It was a razor thin in some states. Plus, my goddamn name is all over the legal documents investigating Trump's staff. And this is the one that gets me the most. November the 22nd, shortly after the election of Donald J. Trump, the FBI lawyer in charge of supervising the FISA process tweets out to friends, "Viva la resistance." What are the odds that this guy might do something wrong? Would you have to be part of a right-wing conspiracy to predict in the future maybe this guy will get off script? Folks, if these are a few irregularities, the rule of law in this country is dead. And here's the good news. These are not a few irregularities. These are a few bad people that couldn't believe Trump won, didn't want him to win, and when he won, couldn't tolerate the fact that he won. And all these smelly people elected him. This is bad stuff. So if you get out of this report, lawful investigation with a few irregularities, it says more about you than Mr. Horowitz. Now, how the hell did this whole thing start? What got us here today? They opened up a counterintelligence investigation in July. We know the Russians are messing in our election. And it was the Russians, ladies and gentlemen, who stole the Democratic National Committee emails, Podesta's emails, and screwed around with Hillary Clinton. It wasn't the Ukrainians. It was the Russians. And they're coming after us again. So to be concerned that the Russians are messing with presidential campaigns was a legitimate concern. So they looked around at the Trump campaign and said, well, let's see if we can protect the Trump campaign. Carter Page went to Moscow a lot, made speeches. If you've ever met Carter Page, one thing you will not accuse him of is being James Bond. This poor guy, Papadopoulos, picked by Sam Clovis to be part of Trump's national security team. This national security team was literally picked up off the street. If you've had a photo with Donald Trump, you spent more time with Donald Trump than Papadopoulos and Page. They're not paid, they're volunteers. But the FBI thinks we need to watch these guys with Manafort, as well as, who's the other one? Flynn, General Flynn. So they open up a counterintelligence investigation. Let's assume for a moment that the small predicate you need has been met. What the hell happened after they opened it up? What did they find? Were their suspicions validated? Or did they find at every turn it's really not true and they ignored it? So one of the first things they tried to do was to get a warrant under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to follow Carter Page, a volunteer for the campaign and American citizen. They applied for the warrant internally in August of 2016, and the lawyers say you don't have enough. Why? Because they had nothing. maybe this reasonable articulation is this small, but to get a warrant from a court, you got to have probable cause. So the lawyer's saying you don't have it. Everybody is now frustrated, folks. That's not the right answer. So McCabe suggests, the number 2 guy at the FBI, well, let's go look at this Steele dossier. Maybe that will get us over the hump. Just stay tuned. We'll talk about that in a minute. So on September the 19th, for the first time, they introduced the Steele dossier into the warrant application process. It worked. September the 21st, they get a sign-off, let's go get a warrant. The dossier got them to where they wanted to go. As you say, Mr. Horowitz, it was central and basically outcome determinative. Without this dossier, they go nowhere. With it, they're off to the races. Who is Christopher Steele? You thought these other people were bad? Wait till you hear about this guy. Christopher Steele was a former MI6, is that right? 6, 5, whatever it is. He was a British agent. Retired. He had a new line of business. He was hired by a company called Fusion GPS to investigate Donald Trump. Okay? You want to look at foreign influence? You're about to find it. Fusion GPS is on the payroll of the Democratic National Party. Christopher Steele is working for a company to find dirt on Trump, and the money comes from the Democratic Party. Did they tell the court this? No. Is that a bit unnerving? Would be to me. So Christopher Steele is on the payroll of a company funded by the Democratic Party. Here's what Bruce Orr tells the FBI about Christopher Steele. He was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being the U.S. president. This is the guy that gave them the work product to get the warrant. Steele told Orr that if Trump won the elections, Steele's source network may be in jeopardy by a new FBI director and new agency heads appointed by Trump who would have a higher degree of loyalty to the new president and could decide to take action against Steele and his source network. Let me tell you about Christopher Steele. Orr was right. He was on a mission to get Donald Trump. Not only did he provide the dossier that made the difference in getting a warrant, his biases were well known. He was shopping the dossier, do we have it? To anybody and everybody in the media and in politics to see if they would print it. The reason the FBI cut him loose was because they found out he was shopping this thing around to media outlets rather than being a valid source. But after they knew he was shopping it around, they kept him around anyway because Mr. Orr kept talking to him. And you think that's a bit. Bruce Orr's wife worked with Christopher Steele. She was employed by Fusion GPS, the wife of the number 4 guy at the FBI. Christopher Steele went all over the United States trying to get media outlets to publish this garbage. The first thing is about the golden shower, about the sexual encounter that President Trump supposedly had in a Ritz-Carlton hotel in Russia. Let me tell you how I come to find out about Christopher Steele's work product. In December of 2016, John McCain goes to a national security conference in Canada, and somebody tells him about the Steele dossier, and it's bad and you need to know about it, and it gets to John McCain. John McCain puts it in his safe, he gives it to me, and I read it. And the first thing I thought of was, oh my God, one of two things. This could be Russian disinformation, or they may have something on Trump. If you read this document, the first thing you would think of is they got something on Donald Trump. It is stunning, it is damning, it is salacious, and it's a bunch of crap. They finally find the guy that prepared all the information. But a little bit about Steele. In 2015, the British Intelligence Service said, you need to watch this guy, he's not reliable. They take time to go to London to check Steele out. And they're told he demonstrates lack of self-awareness, poor judgment, keen to help but underpinned by poor judgment, judgment pursuing people with political risk but no intel value. If you'd spend 30 minutes looking at Christopher Steele, you would understand this guy is biased. He's got an axe to grind. He's on the payroll of the opposing party. Take anything he says with a grain of salt. In January 2017, the FBI figures out who the subsource of the Steele dossier is. What you need to know, this is not what Steele found himself. This is what he gathered from one person. They finally found out who this one person is. They go talk to him in January 2017. Where's that summary? 5 people interview the primary subsource, the guy that provided Steele with everything. And they showed him the dossier. Read pages 186 to 190. What does the Russian guy tell the FBI about the dossier? That Steele misstated or exaggerated the prime subsource's statements, that Trump's alleged sexual activities at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow was rumor and speculation. He went on to say he heard it at a bar. And in the report, it suggests that a Western employee of the Ritz-Carlton confirmed this escapade by then private citizen Trump. When he read that, he says, that's not true. I never told Steele that somebody working for the Ritz-Carlton confirmed this. I heard it at a bar. Primary subsource stated that he never expected Steele to put the primary subsource's statements in reports or present them as facts. They were word of mouth and hearsay, conversations had with friends over beers, were statements made in jest that should be taken with a grain of salt. So in January 2017, the person who did all the assembling of the information for the now famous Steele dossier tells the FBI, I disavow everything in there. Now, what should happen? Time out? Let's reassess? Maybe we got this wrong? What would you hope to happen? That the FBI would slow down? Because this is the outcome determinative document that's just had a hole blown through it. They don't slow down. They use the document they now know to be a bunch of garbage twice more to get a warrant against Carter Page. I hope Carter Page gets a lawyer and sues the hell out of the Department of Justice and the FBI. 2 more warrants were obtained by the Department of Justice and the FBI after being told in January by the Russian guy it's all a bunch of bull. But it gets worse. Here's how they describe the interview to the court. The FBI found that the Russian-based subsource to be truthful and cooperative. Nothing about, and oh, by the way, he said everything in there is a bunch of bull. You knew in January 2017, if there was no doubt before, you know by the guy who prepared it that he disavowed everything. It's not true. It's a grain of salt. You shouldn't. I didn't say all these things. Instead of stopping, they keep going. And instead of telling the court the truth, what they're required to do, they lie to the court. A few irregularities. How would you like this to happen in your life? How would you like to be on the receiving end of this? To our people in the news business, what would you like? How would you like this to be your news organization? In January 2017, there is no benefit of the doubt to be given. These 5 people from the Department of Justice and the FBI have been told by the one guy who did all the work it's a bunch of garbage. And the question is, how far up to the system did it go? Why did they apply for warrants twice more? Why didn't they stop? Everybody wants to know, was there any bias here? What motivated these people? Why do you think they kept going? Maybe because they were on a mission, not to protect Trump, but to protect us from Trump. That's what they were trying to protect, all of us smelly people from Donald Trump. That's what this is about. Whether you believe it or not, I believe it. And you know what? It could happen to y'all next time. There's some pretty passionate people on our side that I wouldn't want to be investigating any of you. So what happens next? They get a warrant twice more when they know it's a bunch of garbage. They lie to the court about the actual interview. I don't know what McCabe and Comey knew, but I'm dying to find out, and should they have known. June 2017. This is the next time they take the law in their own hands. Mr. Kleinsmith, 6 months after being told the dossier is a bunch of garbage, Kleinsmith alters an email from the CIA to change it from he is to he's not. Because if they had told the court that Page was working for the CIA, it explains the contact in the dossier. Mr. Kleinsmith had a chance in his mind to make things right, and he took it. Why did he take the law in his own hands? Why did he doctor the email? Did it have anything to do with the way he sees Donald Trump's presidency? You know what? It really doesn't matter what he was thinking. It matters what he did. And I'm glad you found out what he did. I'm glad you told the country what he did, because I'm hoping that nobody will ever do it again. So, Mr. Horowitz, the 17 irregularities that you found, some of them are earth-shattering. Some of them should scare the hell out of all of us. I just want to end sort of where I began. This is not normal. Don't judge the FBI and the Department of Justice by these characters. We're better than this. Like many of you, I've worked with the FBI a lot of my time in government. I have a great respect for it. Director Wray, you got a problem. And for this hearing to mean anything, we got to fix it. And the way we fix it is listen to Mr. Horowitz and get the director of the FBI in here to try to find out a way to make sure this never happens again to any politician in this country. It's Trump today, it could be you or me tomorrow. And imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if they can do this to the candidate for the President of the United States, what could they do to you? So the Trump presidency will end in a year or 5 years. I don't know when. I hope he gets reelected. But we can't write this off as being just about one man or one event. We've got to understand how off the rails the system got. And I'll leave with some optimism here. I think Democrats and Republicans are willing to make sure this never happens again. That if you open up a counterintelligence investigation on a presidential campaign in the future, there needs to be more checks and balances. I want you to audit the FISA process. Mike Lee and Senator Leahy are probably the standard bearers for civil liberties. Cruz, a lot of people we all care, but these are the two that constantly want to make sure that somebody's watching those who watch us. They're worried about metadata. While I may not agree with all of your concerns or all of your solutions, I respect the fact that you care. I hope you won't treat this report as finding a lawful investigation with a few irregularities. I'm a pretty hawkish guy. But if the court doesn't take corrective action and do something about being manipulated and lied to, you will lose my support. I know a lot about what's going on out there to hurt us, and they're real threats, and they're real agents, and they're really bad actors out there. I'd hate to lose the ability of the FISA court to operate at a time probably when we need it the most. But after your report, I have serious concerns about whether the FISA court can continue unless there's fundamental reform. After your report, I think we need to rewrite the rules of how you start a counterintelligence investigation and the checks and balances that we need. Mr. Horowitz, for us to do justice to your report, we have to do more than try to shade this report one way or the other. We have to address the underlying problem of a system in the hands of a few bad people can do a lot of damage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume there is no time limit.
Take all the time you need.
Well, I won't take a long time, but I've been reading these reports, ladies and gentlemen, now for 25 years. And I have great appreciation for this Inspector General. And I just want to make those personal remarks. This is a tough arena. And as you can see, there are very tough people part of that arena. But to have an Inspector General who tells it as they see it and does this year after year is a saving grace. And I hope people will get this report. If I have a grievance, it's that the print is too small.
I agree with that.
And thank you very much. And it is heavy to carry around. But last year, this Inspector General pledged to Congress that he would examine whether political bias played a role in the FBI's decision to investigate ties between Russia and the Trump campaign. The Inspector General kept his promise. His office conducted a 19-month investigation. They interviewed more than 100 witnesses, reviewed more than 1 million documents, and issued this 434-page report that contains several important findings. First, on a question of bias, Inspector General Horowitz found no evidence that political or anti-Trump bias was at play. According to the IG's report, the FBI complied with existing Department and FBI policies in opening the investigation. And the IG, quote, did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced this decision, end quote, or any specific investigative steps taken by the FBI. That's the finding. And this is important. Why? In public statements beginning last spring, the Attorney General expressed his belief that senior government officials may have, quote, put a thumb on the scale, end quote, because of political bias against Trump. His comments echoed the president, who has repeatedly alleged that there is a deep state within the government against him. He has used this to dismiss the entire Russia investigation as a witch hunt and a hoax. The IG's report conclusively refutes these claims. This was not a politically motivated investigation. There is no deep state. Simply put, the FBI investigation was motivated by facts, not bias. Secondly, The Inspector General confirmed that there was an adequate predicate, meaning a legitimate, factual, and legal basis to investigate. The basis was not, as some have claimed, the so-called Steele dossier. In fact, reporting from Mr. Steele played no role in opening the investigation. Instead, this report confirms that the FBI opened the investigation after being told by Australia, a trusted foreign ally, that Trump advisor George Papadopoulos had learned in 2016, the month of April, that Russia had and was willing to release, quote, information during the campaign that would be damaging to candidate Clinton, end quote. The IG report found that, quote, this information provided the FBI with a factual basis that, if true, quote, indicated activity constituting either a federal crime or a threat to national security, or both may have occurred or may be occurring. The IG also found that when the FBI learned that in late July 2016, the Bureau was aware of Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 elections, including Russian hacking of Democratic campaign computers. Materials stolen by Russia had been released online, including by WikiLeaks. And the U.S. intelligence community assessed in August of 2016 that, quote, Russia was considering further intelligence operations to impact and disrupt elections, end quote. Against this backdrop, the FBI was obligated to investigate possible ties to the Trump campaign. According to Bill Priestap, the FBI Assistant Director who authorized opening the investigation. Other officials conveyed a similar obligation and sense of urgency to investigate. David Loffman, a National Security Division chief, said it would have been, and I quote, a dereliction of duty and responsibility of the highest order not to commit the appropriate resources as urgently as possible to run these facts to the ground and find out what was going on, end quote. The decision to open the investigation was unanimous. Not a single official disagreed. As a result, America ultimately learned extensive details about Russia's sweeping and systemic attack on the 2016 election, including that the Trump campaign knew about, welcomed, and, quote, expected it would benefit electorally, end quote, from Russia's efforts. The Inspector General's report also identifies several errors made by FBI and Justice Department line personnel when seeking warrants for surveillance on Carter Page from the FISA court. FBI Director Wray submitted a written response accepting the IG's findings, including the key finding that the FBI had sufficient cause to investigate the Trump's campaign ties to Russia. Director Wray also said that the IG's findings of FISA errors are, and I quote, constructive criticism that will make us stronger as an organization, and that he has already taken action to address the IG's recommendations. By contrast, Attorney General Barr issued a press release that continues to criticize the FBI for investigating the Trump campaign. It's really extraordinary that the Attorney General continues to make unsupported attacks on the agency that he is responsible for leading. I believe strongly that it's time to move on from the false claims of political bias. And those who showed great interest in the question of politically motivated investigations against President Trump should show the same concern about politically motivated investigations requested by the President or his Attorney General. Inspector General Horowitz, I want to thank you on behalf of this side and your staff for the hard work. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz.
Chairman Graham, Senator Feinstein, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. The report that my office released this week is the product of a comprehensive and exhaustive review conducted over the past 19 months by an OIG team that examined more than 1 million documents in the department's and the FBI's possession, including documents other U.S. agencies had provided to the FBI. Our team conducted over 170 interviews involving more than 100 witnesses, and we documented all of our findings in the 434-page report that we issued this week. I would encourage everybody to read the report, although I understand 400-plus page reports can be hard to get through. We do have a pithy, I'll call it, 19-page executive summary with it, which I would encourage people to read at a minimum. I want to commend also the tireless efforts of our outstanding review team for conducting such rigorous and effective independent oversight. It's exactly what we are supposed to do as inspectors general. The FBI investigation that's the subject of this report, Crossfire Hurricane, was opened on July 31, 2016, days after the FBI received reporting from a friendly foreign government. The reporting stated that in a May 2016 meeting with the friendly foreign government, Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos suggested, quote, suggested the Trump team had received some kind of a suggestion, close quote, from Russia that it could assist in the election process with the anonymous release of information during the campaign that would be damaging to candidate Clinton and then President Obama. Following receipt of that information, the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane. Given the nature and sensitivity of such an investigation, we would have expected FBI personnel to faithfully adhere to the FBI's detailed policies, practices, and norms. The FBI has developed and earned a reputation as one of the world's premier law enforcement agencies, in significant part because of its adherence to those policies and its tradition of professionalism, impartiality, and non-political enforcement of the law. However, our review identified significant concerns with how certain aspects of the investigation were conducted and supervised, particularly the FBI's failure to adhere to its own standards of accuracy and completeness when filing applications with the applications for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Authority, known as FISA, to surveil Carter Page, a U.S. person who was connected to the Trump for President campaign. We determined that the decision to open Crossfire Hurricane was made by the then FBI Counterintelligence Division's Assistant Director, Bill Priestap, and that his decision reflected a consensus reached after multiple days of discussions and meetings among senior FBI officials. We reviewed department and FBI policies and concluded that Assistant Director Priestap's exercise of discretion in opening the investigation was in compliance with those policies. We also reviewed, as we detail in the report, the emails, text messages, and other documents of those involved in that decision, and particularly Mr. Priestap's, and we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that indicated political bias or improper motivation influencing his decision to open the investigation. While the information in the FBI's possession at the time was limited, in light of the low threshold established by department and FBI predication policy, which, by the way, is not a legal requirement, but rather a prudential one in the FBI and department policies, we found that Crossfire Hurricane was open for an authorized investigative purpose and with sufficient factual predication. This decision to open Crossfire Hurricane, which involved the activities of individuals associated with a national major party campaign for president, was, under department and FBI policy, a discretionary judgment left to the FBI. As we point out in our report, there was no requirement that department officials be consulted or even notified of that decision prior to the FBI making that decision. Consistent with this policy, the FBI advised supervisors in the department's National Security Division of the investigation days after it had been opened. As we detail in our report, high-level department notice and approval is required in other circumstances where investigative activity could substantially impact certain civil liberties, and that notice allows senior department officials to consider the potential constitutional and prudential implications in advance of those activities. We concluded that similar notice should be required in circumstances such as those present here. Shortly after the FBI opened the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the FBI conducted several consensually monitored meetings, recorded meetings, between FBI confidential human sources, which we refer to as CHSs, and individuals affiliated with the Trump campaign, including a high-level campaign official who was not a subject of the investigation. We found that the CHS operations received the necessary approvals under FBI policy, that an FBI assistant director, Mr. Priestap, knew about and approved of each operation, even in circumstances where what was only required was first-level supervisory agent approval, and that the operations were permitted under department and FBI policy because their use was not for the sole purpose of monitoring activities protected by the First Amendment or the lawful exercise of other rights secured by the Constitution or laws of the United States. We did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced the FBI's decision to conduct those CHS operations. Additionally, we found no evidence that the FBI attempted to place CHSs within or report on the Trump campaign or recruit members of the Trump campaign as CHSs. However, we were concerned that under applicable department and FBI policy, it would have been sufficient for a first-level FBI supervisor to authorize the sensitive domestic CHS operations undertaken in Crossfire Hurricane, and that there is no applicable department or FBI policy requiring the FBI to notify department officials of a decision to task a confidential human source to consensually monitor, record, in other words, record conversations with members of a political campaign. Just in terms of that, it's worth noting that had in the mid-year investigation, which was the Clinton email investigation, or in this investigation, the FBI could have, at the supervisory agent level, so one level removed from a line agent, authorized an undercover or authorized a confidential human source to have a consensually monitored conversation with either of the presidential candidates, with no notice to the Department of Justice or any lawyer in the Department of Justice. In Crossfire Hurricane, where each of the operations had the potential to gather sensitive campaign information protected by the First Amendment, we found no evidence that the FBI consulted with department officials before conducting those operations, and no policy, as I just noted, requiring them to do so. We concluded that current department and FBI policies are not sufficient to ensure appropriate oversight and accountability when such operations potentially implicate sensitive, constitutionally protected activity, and that requiring department consultation at a minimum would be appropriate. And we make a recommendation to that effect. One investigative tool for which the department and the FBI policy does expressly require express advance approval by a senior department official is the seeking of a court order under FISA. When the Crossfire Hurricane team first proposed seeking a FISA order targeting Carter Page in mid-August 2016, FBI attorneys assisting the investigation considered it a, quote, close call, close quote, and the FISA order was not requested at the time. However, in September 2016, immediately after the Crossfire Hurricane team received reporting from Christopher Steele concerning Page's alleged recent activities with Russian officials, FBI attorneys advised the department that it was ready to move forward with a request to obtain FISA authority to surveil Page. FBI and department officials told us the Steele reporting, quote, pushed the FISA proposal over the line, close quote, in terms of establishing probable cause, and we concluded that the Steele reporting played a central and essential role in the decision to seek a FISA order. FBI leadership supported relying on Steele's reporting to seek a FISA order after being advised of concerns expressed by a department attorney that Steele may have been hired by someone associated with a rival candidate or campaign. Surveillance authority under FISA can significantly assist the government's efforts to combat terrorism, clandestine intelligence activity, and other threats to the national security. At the same time, the use of this authority unavoidably raises civil liberties concerns. FISA orders can be used to surveil U.S. persons, and in some cases, the surveillance will foreseeably collect information about the individual's constitutionally protected activities, such as Carter Page's legitimate activities on behalf of a presidential campaign. Moreover, proceedings before the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which is responsible for ruling on applications for FISA orders, are ex parte, meaning that unlike most court proceedings, the government is the only party present for the proceedings, and FISA orders have not been subject to scrutiny through subsequent adversarial proceedings like court-authorized search warrants and wiretap applications are potentially through the criminal process. In light of these concerns, the FISA statute and Department and FBI policies and procedures have established important safeguards to protect the FISA application process from irregularities and abuse. Among the most important are the requirements in FBI policy that every FISA application must contain a, quote, full and accurate, close quote, presentation of the facts, and that agents must ensure that all factual statements in FISA applications are, quote, scrupulously accurate, close quote. These are the standards for all FISA applications, regardless of the investigation's sensitivity, and it is incumbent upon the FBI to meet them in every application. Nevertheless, we found that investigators failed to meet their basic obligations of ensuring that the FISA applications were scrupulously accurate. We identified significant inaccuracies and omissions in each of the 4 applications, 7 in the first application and a total of 17 by the final renewal application. For example, the Crossfire Hurricane team obtained information from Steele's primary subsource in January 2017 that raised significant questions about the reliability of the Steele reporting. This was particularly noteworthy because the FISA applications relied entirely on information from the primary subsource's reporting to support the allegation that Page was coordinating with the Russian government on 2016 U.S. presidential election activities. However, the FBI did not share this information with department lawyers, and it was therefore omitted from the last 2 renewal applications. All of the applications also omitted information that the FBI had obtained in August 2016, from another U.S. government agency detailing its prior relationship with Page, with Carter Page, including that Carter Page had been approved as an operational contact for that other agency from 2008 to 2013, that Page had provided information to the other agency concerning his prior contacts with certain Russian intelligence officers, and that an employee of that other agency assessed that Carter Page had been candid with them. The FBI never followed up on that information. As a result of these 7 significant inaccuracies and omissions, relevant information was not shared with and consequently considered by department lawyers and the FISA court. And the FISA applications made it appear as though the evidence supporting probable cause was stronger than was actually the case. We also found basic, fundamental, and serious errors during the completion of the FBI's factual accuracy reviews, known as the Woods procedures, which are designed to ensure that FISA applications contain a full and accurate presentation of the facts. Department lawyers and the court should have been given complete and accurate information so they could have meaningfully evaluated probable cause before authorizing the surveillance of a U.S. person associated with a presidential campaign. That did not occur. And as a result, the surveillance of Carter Page continued even as the FBI gathered information that weakened the assessment of probable cause and made the FISA applications less accurate. We concluded that investigators did not give appropriate consideration or attention to facts that cut against probable cause, and that as the investigation progressed and more information tended to undermine or weaken the assertions in the FISA applications, investigators did not reassess the information supporting probable cause. Further, the agents and supervisory agents did not follow or even appear to know certain basic requirements in the Woods procedures. Although we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence of intentional misconduct, we also did not receive satisfactory explanations for any of the errors or omissions we identified. We found, and as we outline here, are deeply concerned that so many basic and fundamental errors were made by 3 separate hand-picked investigative teams on one of the most sensitive FBI investigations after the matter had been briefed to the highest levels within the FBI, even though the information sought through the use of FISA authority related so closely to an ongoing presidential campaign, and even though those involved with the investigation knew that their actions would likely be subjected to close scrutiny. The circumstances reflect a failure, as we outline in the report, not just by those who prepared the applications, but also by the managers and supervisors in the Crossfire Hurricane chain of command, including FBI senior officials who were briefed as the investigation progressed. We believe that in the FBI's most sensitive and high-priority matters, and especially when seeking court permission to use an intrusive tool such as a FISA order, it's incumbent upon the entire chain of command at the organization, including senior officials, to take the necessary steps to ensure that they are sufficiently familiar with the facts and circumstances supporting and potentially undermining a FISA application in order to provide effective oversight consistent with their level of supervisory responsibility. Such oversight requires greater familiarity with the facts than we saw in this review, where time and again during our OIG interviews, FBI managers, supervisors, and senior officials displayed a lack of understanding or awareness of important information concerning many of the problems that we identified. That is why, as you will see in the report, our final recommendation was to refer the entire chain of command that we outline here to the FBI and the Department for consideration of how to assess and address their performance failures. Additionally, in light of the significant concerns we identified, the OIG announced this week that we were initiating an audit that will further examine the FBI's compliance with the Woods procedures in FISA applications that target U.S. persons, not only in counterintelligence investigations, but also, importantly, in counterterrorism investigations. The OIG report made a number of other recommendations to the Department and the FBI. We believe that implementation of those recommendations, including those that seek individual accountability for the failures identified in our report, will improve the FBI's ability to more carefully and effectively utilize its important national security authorities like FISA, while also striving to safeguard the civil liberties and privacy of impacted U.S. persons. The OIG will continue to conduct rigorous oversight of these matters in the months and years ahead, including the recommendations that we made in this week's report. That concludes my statement, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, and again, to your team, thank you for the service you've done to the country here. The former FBI Director James Comey said this week that your report vindicates him. Is that a fair assessment of your report?
I think the activities we found here don't vindicate anybody who touched this.
Okay. Let's run a clip here. This is what Comey said in 2018. It would be nice to have sound. Do we have sound? Okay. Never mind, I'll read it. Director Comey, the reporter is asking him, can I ask you a question on FISA abuse? It's a major issue for the Republicans. Do you have a total confidence in the dossier when you used it to secure a surveillance warrant and also in the subsequent renewals? This was asked in December of 2018, about a year ago. Comey, I have total confidence that the FISA process was followed, that the entire case was handled in a thoughtful, responsible way by DOJ and the FBI. I think the notion that FISA was abused here is nonsense. Would it be fair to say that you take issue with that statement?
Certainly our findings were that there were significant problems with
So when Comey speaks about FISA, you shouldn't listen. You should listen to Mr. Horowitz. He's not vindicated, and to be concerned about the FISA warrant process is not nonsense. Christopher Steele, is it fair to say that he had a political bias against Donald Trump?
Given who he was paid for, there was a bias that needed to be disclosed to the court.
Does it seem that he personally had a bias, not just because he's on the payroll of the Democratic Party, but he...
Well, we found in the course of this and heard from Mr. Orr about his comment to him that he was desperate to prevent Mr. Trump's election.
Again, this is the guy that provides the dossier that gets the warrant over the top against Carter Page. He's paid for by the Democratic Party, and he personally believes it's bad for Donald Trump to win. He's marketing the dossier, which is a bunch of garbage, to anybody and everybody. To me, that's important. Is that important to you?
Any evidence of bias is supposed to be disclosed to the court and to the department lawyers.
Okay, so let's play this out. In January 2017, when they figure out the primary subsource and they talk to the Russian guy that provided Steele all the information, what should the FBI have done at that moment?
Two things. Reconsidered internally where things stood, and most importantly, told the lawyers at the Justice Department who they were asking to help them get a FISA.
And there are 5 people in that interview, right?
Correct.
Okay. Are you going to make sure those 5 people are known to the higher-ups?
They are all part of the referral that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Did they have a duty to report to their supervisors and eventually to the court exculpatory information?
Absolutely.
They did not.
They did not.
Why?
That's the question I can't specifically answer for you.
Can you say it wasn't because of political bias?
On decisions regarding those FISA matters, I do not know their state of mind at this point.
So we're talking about actions now and trying to figure out what would motivate people. Do you think Comey and McCabe should have known?
That's a challenging question. As we explain in the report, there were multiple briefings up the chain, including to the director and the deputy director. We don't have a clear record of what precisely they were told, and as you know, as information flows upstream.
Would you be surprised if it didn't make it up the system? Something this earth-shattering?
I'm not going to speculate as to what might or might not.
Did Strzok know?
So Mr. Strzok's, there are 3 iterations of the team. Mr. Strzok's actually transitions off as on this matter in January of 2017. So it's not, I might have to go back and look precisely.
Well, in February, he mentions that Steele can't verify.
Correct.
So pretty clear to me that it got up. So the court should have been told they were not.
Correct.
How did they describe this meeting to the court in the warrant application?
So in the second and third renewals, the last 2 applications, they told the court that they had interviewed Steele's primary subsource, upon whom Steele relied in writing the reporting, and that they found the primary subsource to be credible. They did not tell the court or the department lawyers any of the information which would have allowed them to know that if you found the primary subsource credible, you couldn't have also found the Steele reporting credible.
Did they mislead the court?
That was misleading to the court and to the department to not know that information.
So they did 2 things in January 2017. They failed to report, obviously, exculpatory information, and when they did report to the court about the interview, they lied about it.
But let me add also that a year later, in June of 2018, when the department sent a Rule 13 letter to the court informing them of other information that had not been provided to the court, the department still didn't know about the primary subsource information. And so when the department in its letter said that it still stood behind the FISA applications,
very interesting,
they referenced the primary subsource again and the fact that the FBI found that person credible.
So are these the best and brightest we have?
Well, certainly the FBI, the actions of the FBI agents on this were not
So
up to the
McCabe
standards of the FBI.
handpicks these people. Are they representative of the department as a whole in your view?
I certainly hope that that is not the way others are following these practices.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so let's fast forward now to June of 2016. Mr. Kleinsmith, who's he?
I'm going to defer on speaking about people who we don't name specifically in the report.
Who's the guy that altered? Tell me about the guy that altered the email from the CIA.
So there was a lawyer in the Office of General Counsel at the FBI who was the line attorney working with the agents and counterparts at the National Security Division on the FISA. And that individual in June of 2017, as the last application was being prepared, and immediately following Mr. Page, Carter Page, going to news outlets after word of the FISAs hit the news media, and said to the news media, I was someone who worked with U.S. intelligence agencies, not someone who worked against them. Lawyers and agents went and said, we've got to figure out what's the story. Is that what happened? The lawyer, the OGC attorney for the FBI, reached out to a liaison at the other government agency that was at issue, asked the question, was Mr. Page a source or a contact of some sort for your organization? The report back in the email referenced the August 2016 memorandum that agency had provided to the FBI that I mentioned in my opening statement the FBI did no follow-up on, and said what that liaison's general recollection was that Mr. Page was or is someone who had a relationship with the entity, with the other government agency, but that the lawyer should go look at the report for confirmation. The lawyer then had a conversation with the FBI agent who was going to be the affiant, the person who swore out that final application, FISA application. The agent told us, and is detailed in here, was concerned about what he had learned about what Page said publicly and wanted a definitive answer, as he put it, as to whether Page was...
Because if the agent, if Carter Page was actually telling the truth, it changes one of the predicates to consider him a foreign agent.
That was the concern of the agent. Yeah. And it was the agent who was going to be swearing out
If true, it would be helpful to Mr. Page.
It certainly could have and may well have been very helpful to Mr. Page.
Okay.
But it's at a minimum, without any doubt, it should have been known, it should have been followed up on, and it should have been
what did this lawyer do?
The FBI. When the lawyer had the discussion with the agent, and the agent said, I want to see it, do you have it in writing? The lawyer said he did, and he forwarded the liaison's email, but altered it to insert the words, and not a source, into the email.
So he doctored it.
He doctored the original email from the liaison.
It made it look like the CIA denied knowing Mr. Page.
It flatly stated that he was not a source.
Okay, now just imagine, folks, you're representing somebody as a defense attorney and they do this to one of your clients. I hope somebody pays a price for this, whether you like Trump or not. So why did Mr. Kleinsmith, that's who we're talking about, you don't have to say it, I'll say it. What motivated him to do that?
It is unknown as to precisely why he did it, but we
This is
cite...
the Viva la Resistance
Right.
guy.
I was going to mention, but we reference in here the text messages you mentioned, and
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
not made a determination, but rather, as we note in here,
Yeah.
when we learned this, we notified the Attorney General and
No,
the FBI Director and referred it to.
You did a great job. The old adage is if you wake up and the lawn is wet, you can assume it rained. If you've got a guy who hates Trump's guts from day one, thinks Pence is stupid, and everybody who voted for Trump's an idiot, and you give him power over Trump, maybe you're making a mistake. Or again, maybe, all these people who had these biases did nothing about it, maybe not. It doesn't really matter. We know what they did. Is it fair to say that after January 2017, when the guy who gave Steele all the information disavows the dossier, that not only they should have told the court, they should have slowed down? Do you think the second and third warrants had a legal basis after that point?
We don't reach that conclusion, and I'm not going to.
Would you have submitted a warrant application as a lawyer?
Let me put it this way. I would not have submitted the one they put in.
Okay.
But no doubt about it. It had no business going in with that.
So what I want you to know is that in January 2017, the whole foundation for surveilling Carter Page collapses. Exculpatory information is ignored. They lie to the court about what the interview was all about. Is that a fair summary so far about the January 2017?
They certainly misled, it was misleading to the court.
Okay, fair enough. And in January, about 6 months later, when they find more information that could be helpful to Mr. Page, they lie about it. Do you feel like Mr. Page was treated fairly by the Department of Justice and the FBI?
I don't think the Department of Justice fairly treated these FISAs, and he was on the receiving end of the FISA.
You would not want to be on the receiving end of this, would you?
I would not want agents or anybody failing to put forward all the information they're obligated to tell the court on. I was in AUSA. I've seen what can occur.
I would be very comfortable with you investigating anybody, because I think you know the difference between getting somebody and trying to find the truth. That's what this is all about. The counterintelligence investigations. What's the purpose of a counterintelligence investigation?
It's to identify potential threats to the nation.
Okay, this was opened up as a counterintelligence investigation, right?
Correct.
And we know the Russians were screwing around with the Democrats, right? That's one of the concerns. Correct. It was the Russians who acted in the DNC.
Correct.
Got their emails.
Correct.
So it's okay for everybody to be concerned. What are the Russians up to? I get that. It's okay to look at what's the standard to start one of these things?
There are two types of investigations. Both of them have relatively low thresholds, as we point out here, for predication.
Okay. So let's assume for a moment that relatively low threshold was met. Would it be fair to say that if you stop there and looking at your report, you're making a mistake?
You would be making a mistake. There is 400 pages here for a reason.
There's a mountain of misconduct. Please don't ignore it. So my point is, if this is a counterintelligence investigation, who are they trying to protect? Who should they be trying to protect?
Well, if it's the threat outlined in the friendly foreign government information, you would be looking to protect the election process,
right?
Which would include
the candidate,
the campaign, the candidate, and the American people. Okay,
so did they ever brief Hillary Clinton about efforts to foreign influences involving her campaign? Do you know?
I've heard that, but I don't know for a fact.
They did. Good for them. And they stopped it. Was there ever a defensive briefing given by the FBI, the Department of Justice, to Donald Trump about the concerns?
There was not.
What would you call a counterintelligence investigation that never had a protective element?
I'm not sure. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if without eventually trying to protect the entity being influenced, is it legitimate?
It would depend on each fact and circumstance.
Here's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
If you're opening up a counterintelligence investigation to protect somebody, You should do it. Did they ever try to protect Donald Trump from foreign influence?
They did not brief him, and we lay out on page 55.
As a matter of fact, when they went in and gave a vanilla briefing, the Russians are out there, you better beware. Didn't they have an FBI agent do a 302 on the defensive briefing itself?
They sent one of the supervisory agents from the Crossfire Hurricane team to the briefing, and that agent prepared a report to the file of the briefing
About what Trump said.
about what Mr. Trump said and what Mr. Flynn said.
Okay, so when we get defensively briefed tomorrow, would it be okay for FBI agents to open up 302s on what we said?
We have very significant concerns about that, and I would note that in Director Wray's response, he underlined that that would not occur going forward.
To those who can set aside how I feel about Trump for a minute, under the guise of protecting the campaign from Russian influence, they never lift a finger to protect the campaign. Every time they had information that the people they suspected were working for the Russians, it went the other way, and they kept going. When they did generically brief candidate Trump, they sent an FBI agent in to do a 302. If this doesn't bother you, you hate Trump way too much. Was that FBI agent spying on Donald Trump when he went in there?
It was a pretext meeting that I'm not going to, the process by which they have to do these meetings.
If you don't have a foundation for a warrant and you continue, I'm sorry, go ahead. Do you need to say anything else?
I'm sorry.
There's no, okay.
The incident, the event, the meeting was a briefing, and the FBI considered and decided to send that agent there to do the briefing. So the agent was actually doing the briefing, but also using it for the purpose of investigation.
Okay, now I hope that doesn't happen to us tomorrow. I'll be really pissed if it does. Okay, so let's play this out. They never told Trump about the concerns. Is it fair to say there came a point to where surveilling Carter Page became unlawful?
I will let the court decide that. The court has this report and will make that decision.
Let's put it this way. If you don't have a legal foundation to surveil somebody and you keep doing it, is that bad?
Absolutely.
Is that spying?
It's not. It's illegal surveillance. It's not court-authorized
Whatever
surveillance.
illegal
under FISA.
surveillance means, they did it. So all this stuff that they didn't illegally surveil Trump's campaign, they did because they had no legal basis after the January 2017 data dump by the Russian guy to believe that the dossier was reliable. They altered exculpatory information in June of 2017 that would have further proven that Carter Page is not a Russian agent who was actually working with the CIA. Let me ask you very directly. Do you believe Carter Page is or ever was an agent of the Russian government trying to do harm to his country?
I'm going to refer to the evidence we found here, which is that at the end of this,
thank you.
The FBI, at the end of these FISAs, told us that they had found no evidence to corroborate the allegations in the Steele dossier related to him.
It's not that clean, folks. They knew and they ignored it. And they continued to surveil him. Why? Why did they doctor the email? The people who continued getting warrants after they knew it wasn't legitimate had a bias that reeked. How this thing was open, I don't know, but I can tell you Mr. Durham has a different view. I respect your view that they may have been a lawful predicate, giving them every benefit of the doubt, but one of the people pushing this was Peter Strzok from day one. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a task at hand here to make sure this never happens again, to hold people accountable, change our laws, save the FISA court if we can, and I hope this chapter in American history is never repeated. And finally, if you report that this 434-page report says lawful investigation with a few irregularities, you're doing a great disservice to the American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we spoke, Inspector General, Yeah, it pointed out your office spent 19 months and interviewed 100 witnesses, and your report concluded that the FBI had an adequate predicate reason to open the investigation on the Trump campaign ties with Russia. Could you quickly define that predicate?
Yeah, so the predicate here was the information that the FBI got at the end of July from the friendly foreign government that reflected a meeting that the friendly foreign government had with Mr. Papadopoulos in May.
Who was the friendly government?
We don't mention that in the report, so I'm going to stick to what we have.
Is that classified?
That is, my understanding is still classified, but
Thank you.
as I sit here, I am only going to speak to what's in our report.
Okay, go ahead.
And as I mentioned in my statement, the comment was that Mr. Papadopoulos had made a suggestion that there had been a suggestion to the Trump campaign that the Russian government could provide information that would be damaging to candidate Clinton and then President Obama.
So your report states that you didn't find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation played a role.
That's correct.
Thank you. And you didn't find a deep state conspiracy against candidate or President Trump.
So, as to the opening, we found no bias, no testimonial documentary evidence on that.
And no rationale for a deep state that.
We looked at Mr. Priestap, as I noted, was the decision maker, and we did not find any evidence in his emails or texts of having engaged in any bias or having any bias.
FBI Director Wray provided a written response to your report, accepting all of your findings. And these include the key finding that there was, quote, an authorized purpose and actual factual predication for the investigation. By contrast, Attorney General Barr expressed his doubt about the legitimacy of the FBI's investigation in press statements. Did Attorney General Barr provide any evidence that caused you to alter this key finding that the FBI investigation had an adequate predicate?
No, we stand by our finding.
Thank you. During your investigation, Attorney General Barr stated his belief that, quote, spying on the Trump campaign did occur, end quote. And as you said, your investigation found no evidence that the FBI placed any confidential source within the Trump campaign or tasked any confidential source to report on the Trump campaign. That's correct, right?
That's correct.
And further, no evidence that political bias or improper motivations influenced the decision to use confidential sources as part of the investigation.
That's correct.
Did your office ask Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney John Durham to share whatever evidence they had that might be relevant to your investigation?
We asked Mr. Durham to do that.
And what about Attorney General Barr?
And Attorney General Barr.
Thank you. So nothing they could provide altered your office's conclusion that the FBI did not place spies in the Trump campaign?
None of the discussions changed our findings here.
Thank you. In a press statement issued Monday, U.S. Attorney John Durham, tasked by Attorney General Barr to also investigate the origins of the Russia investigation, stated, and I quote, "Last month, we advised the IG that we do not agree with some of the report's conclusions as to predication and how the FBI case was opened." What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was surprised by the statement. I didn't necessarily know it was going to be released on Monday. We did meet with Mr. Durham, as I mentioned. We provided him with a copy of the report, as we did others, through our factual accuracy review process. We met with him in November. With regard to that, we did discuss the opening issue. He said he did not necessarily agree with our conclusion about the opening of a full counterintelligence investigation, which is what this was. But there is also an investigative means by which the FBI can move forward with an investigation. It's called a preliminary investigation. So there are two types of investigations, full and preliminary. They opened a full here. He said during the meeting that the information from the friendly foreign government was, in his view, sufficient to support the preliminary investigation. And as we note in the report, investigative steps such as confidential human source activity that occurred here are allowed under a preliminary investigation or under a full investigation.
Did either Barr or Durham present anything that altered your findings?
No.
I wanted to ask you, since we have the author of the whistleblower legislation very proudly sitting here, you previously told this committee that whistleblower rights and protections have been one of your highest priorities since becoming IG. As you know, there have been calls for the Ukraine whistleblower to be identified publicly, even though that person was not a direct witness to the events. So what is your view? Should the Ukraine whistleblower's confidentiality be breached and that person identified publicly? And why not?
So whistleblower protections have been one of my highest priorities. I've appreciated working with all the members of the committee, obviously particularly Senator Grassley. We wrote a letter recently as the IG community quoting his statement on the issues and the importance of whistleblowers. And whistleblowers have a right to expect complete, full confidentiality in all circumstances. It's in the law, in the IG Act that Congress wrote, and it's a very important provision.
Thank you. In a public hearing before the House Intelligence Committee, Deputy Secretary of State George Kent testified that politically associated investigations or prosecutions against opponents of those in power undermine the rule of law. Do you agree with that? Do politically motivated investigations undermine the rule of law?
I agree. Any politically motivated investigation undermines the rule of law.
Thank you very much. Did you find any evidence that President Obama or anyone else in the White House asked the United States government to investigate then-candidate Trump or his campaign?
We certainly didn't see any evidence of that in the FBI's files or the department's files, which was our mandate here in our authorized jurisdiction.
You have a policy recommendation regarding the use of confidential human sources. I'd like to ask a few questions about it. Your investigation found that the use of confidential human sources was consistent with existing rules, correct?
Correct.
The use of confidential human sources here was not solely to gather First Amendment protected information.
Correct, and that is the standard currently in the rules.
And you found no evidence that the decision to use confidential human sources was motivated by political bias.
Correct.
Is that correct? With regard to your policy recommendation, what, if anything, do you believe should be changed and why?
So as I mentioned in my opening statement, I think we were surprised to learn and concerned to learn that in an investigation of any political, national party political campaign, the confidential human source usage could be approved by only a first-level supervisor. In this instance, as we note here, some of them were approved at the assistant director level, but they could have been approved at just the line supervisor level. For an investigation of a major party presidential campaign of either side or of any side, that was concerning to us, particularly since there was not a requirement that any department lawyer, whether at the National Security Division, the Criminal Division, the Deputy Attorney General's Office, the Attorney General's Office, needed to be notified at any point in time.
Did you give interviews about your investigation while it was ongoing?
I'm sorry, did I?
Did you give interviews?
Oh, myself?
During the
No,
investigation?
I do not do that.
Did anybody on the IG team?
No, and it would have been entirely inappropriate for them to do so.
So just what, I'd just like to clear this up. What are the dangers of discussing an investigation that's ongoing?
So I actually wrote, and we wrote, a 500-page report about that we issued last year on the mid-year investigation, and among other things, criticized what occurred last year with regard to the handling of that investigation. Ongoing investigations are need to be protected from outside influence. You don't know as an investigator, or you shouldn't conclude as an investigator until you are done with the investigation. You shouldn't be reaching your conclusions until that point. And so giving preliminary ideas, advice, guidance, statements can be misleading, and you should not be reaching final conclusions until you get to the end of the investigation.
There is a lot of misimpression about two people, Strzok and Page. So I want to ask this question. For the last 2 years, President Trump has relentlessly attacked former FBI officials as a way to undermine the investigation. For example, the president tweeted that, and I quote, "How can the Rickett witch hunt proceed when it was started, influenced and worked on by Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who exchanged text messages critical of candidate Trump? Your investigation found that while Lisa Page attended some of the discussions regarding the opening of the investigations, she did not play a role in the decision to open Crossfire Hurricane. You also found that while Strzok was directly involved in the decisions to open Crossfire Hurricane, he was not the sole or even the highest level decision maker to any of those matters. That decision, as I understand it, was made by FBI Assistant Director Priestap, as you have indicated, and by consensus after multiple days of discussions of meetings. Most importantly, you found that the decision had a proper factual basis and that there is no evidence that, quote, political bias or improper motivation influenced it. So, based on your investigation, personal political views expressed in text messages did not motivate the opening of the investigation of ties between Trump campaign advisors and Russia. Is that correct?
That's correct. Ultimately, we concluded that those text messages, which we found last year were entirely inappropriate, didn't ultimately play the role in Mr. Priestap's decision to open the investigation.
Thank you. So your investigation also uncovered text messages between other FBI employees expressing support for candidate and President Trump, correct?
That's correct.
So FBI employees held personal political views that were both favorable and unfavorable toward the candidate at that time.
That's correct. And as we note here, and we noted in last year's report, we did not find that text messages were inappropriate solely because people expressed a view as to which candidate they support or didn't support in an election. What concerned us with the text messages we outlined last year and reference again in this year's report as to certain individuals is the connection between their views and their work on the investigation.
To conclude my questioning, what do you believe, with your long experience, are the most important points that this 400-plus page report brings forward?
Well, I think there are several, as you might expect in a 400-plus page report.
That's why I still have time.
Yes. I think, as we outline in the executive summary, first, it was opened with the proper predicate, sufficient predication by a person, Mr. Priestap, who was not one of the text message persons and senior to those people. Third, that the confidential human source operations, while permitted by FBI policy, should cause everybody to give pause as to whether that policy is sufficient to provide accountability over decisions. And finally, that the FISA process here was not used appropriately, properly, and the rules were not followed.
Well, that concludes my questioning. I just want to say thank you, and thank you to your staff. I'm very grateful to the Inspector General's office, year in, year out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would yield the balance of my time to Senator Leahy.
Yes, ma'am. We're going to have a vote at 12, and we will try to get to Senator Grassley and maybe Senator Leahy and take a break for lunch and come back about 30 minutes after that.
I think I'm going to take her remaining 5 minutes now.
Absolutely.
what you're saying about FISA is, as Senator Graham pointed out earlier, Senator Lee and I have worked on trying to put in some protections in FISA, the USA Freedom Act, and so on. But
He gets 5.
the FBI accepted all of your findings, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that includes where you have raised questions about the use of FISA.
Correct.
Of the 5 investigations you reviewed, the only application for a FISA warrant was with respect to Carter Page, is that correct?
That's correct.
Out of the 5. The 17 errors affecting the Carter Page FISA application came after and thus did not impact the launch of the broader Russia investigation, which became the special counsel's investigation. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. Those occurred in October and later.
So it was not.
Not in August, when the matter was opened.
Now, so that came after
Or in
the
July.
special investigation came after. In the Mueller report, how many pages did the Mueller report refer to Carter Page?
I don't recall the exact number, but it wasn't a large number.
Well, I do know, 'cause I read it. It was 7 pages. That was out of 448 pages, so barely mentioned. I'm not trying to minimize FBI's mistakes here, but keep it in context. The FBI's errors in Carter Page's case do not undermine the unanimous assessment that Russia and not Ukraine interfered in our election. Is that correct?
Yeah, we describe in the report the information about Russia's, the conclusions about Russia's meddling in the 2016 election.
I remember one of the political events Mr. Trump was having. He said, Russia, if you're listening, take a look at this. Well, the Trump campaign seemed to welcome and exploit it. Now, none of these errors, and correct me if I'm wrong, minimize the legitimacy of the dozens of indictments and convictions that resulted from the special counsel's Russia investigation. Is that correct?
We make very clear here that the errors and serious problems we identify are concerning the Carter Page FISA and the people in that chain of command. We don't make any findings as to any other parts of Crossfire Hurricane, which was a far broader investigation.
The reason I mentioned that, I don't want to undermine, because of these errors, undermining the Mueller investigation. I believe they do not undermine the Mueller investigation. Am I correct?
Our review was not of the Mueller investigation. Our review was of the FISAs that were obtained, as we outline here, and of the opening of the investigation, and then the additional question we got about Mr. Orr's activities and the confidential human source use.
And you found, you did 19-month interview. Is it correct that you found no evidence that the investigation was motivated by anti-Trump or political bias? Is that correct?
We found no evidence that the initiation of the investigation was motivated by political bias. It gets murkier, the question gets more challenging, Senator, when you get to the FISA, and when you get to the attorney's actions, for example, in connection with that FISA.
Why I raised that. And did you conclude that there was a legitimate basis to investigate ties between Trump campaign advisors and Russia?
We concluded that the FBI had the predication to open it on July 31 and the subsequent subfiles that they opened about 10 days later or so.
And some of that came from, without naming the trusted foreign ally.
Correct. The information came from the friendly foreign government.
Yeah. And did you find that the FBI complied with and even exceeded current department rules on who can authorize an investigation, who has to be notified?
They followed all the rules with regard to that.
Does it refute the claims made by some that there's a deep state involved?
It finds that it was a properly predicated investigation based on the rules at the FBI.
And did you find anything where the FBI had planted spies in Mr. Trump's campaign?
We found no use of confidential human sources and placing them in the campaign or trying to put them in the campaign.
Okay, well, I've used up the 5 minutes that were left, and
You'll get your 10 minutes.
I was taking her
Yeah, thank
remaining
you.
5 minutes.
I just want to let Senator Grassley go.
Sure.
Thank you.
Has anybody been prosecuted or charged with any of this Russian investigation?
I'm sorry, on this matter that I'm
Yeah.
handling, no one that I'm aware of.
Okay. Following up on a question that Senator Feinstein asked, did the Obama administration or President Obama himself is what the one I'm interested in, know about the counterintelligence investigation?
I don't know the answer to that definitively. Our authority was over the FBI and to look at the FBI and the department activities.
In January 2018, Chairman Graham and I wrote to the FBI and the department referring Christopher Steele for investigation of potentially lying to the FBI. We told the FBI, the department, that what the FBI told the court about Steele's media contacts didn't match with what he told the British court. Four questions in regard to that. Did the FBI ever ask Steele whether he was a source for the September 2016 Yahoo News article that cited Western intelligence sources, quote unquote? If not, why not?
They did not ask that question, despite having the opportunity to do so. And we got a variety of explanations, including that as to some of these issues that they didn't want to offend him or jeopardize their relationship with him.
Question 2, on October the 11th draft of the FISA application stating FBI believes Steele was the source for the Yahoo News article, but it was taken out in the October 14th draft. Why did the FBI originally say Steele was the source? And what factual basis did the FBI have to change that and tell the court that Steele was not a source?
This is what was so disturbing about that event, which is the initial application said, as you noted, that the FBI assessed that Steele was the direct source, or was a direct source. And on October 14th, the drafts changed to the exact opposite. What we found is the FBI had no basis for the first statement, no evidence in their file. It turned out the first statement was, in fact, the accurate statement. The point, though, was they had no evidence to support that. And when they flipped it, they had no evidence to support that either. That's the kind of issue that under the basic Woods procedures, the factual accuracy procedures, had someone been doing their job and following up, they would have seen that and found that. And, of course, had they bothered to ask Mr. Steele, they might have found out which of the two versions was true.
Maybe they weren't interested in doing their job. Question 3. Chairman Graham and I sent our referral to the FBI and the DOJ on January the 4th, 2018. And according to your report, although the FBI already knew that the British intelligence and the FBI officials discussed the litigation with Director Comey, the FBI never got Steele's statement in that litigation until we provided them. The FBI also never considered updating the court on these statements. Why did the court learn? No, when did the court learn about these contradictory statements about whether Steele did or didn't have contact with the media? And did anyone in the FBI seem concerned at all that it was not updating the FISC, the court? It was knowingly providing a court with incorrect and misleading information.
So the FISA court first learned of it in at least as I understand it, in a letter sent in June 2018, a year after the last FISA authorization, when the Justice Department lawyers sent a letter informing them of new information that they had learned, including from the litigation, that Mr. Steele had acknowledged he was a direct contact for Yahoo News in that story. That was the first time the court was told about it.
Okay. Would you look at footnote 461 for me?
Yes.
That footnote states that a former FBI confidential human source contacted an FBI agent in an FBI field office in late July 2016 to report information from, quote, a colleague who runs an investigative firm hired by two entities, the Democratic National Committee, as well as another individual who was not named, to explore Donald Trump's long-standing ties to Russian entities, end of quote. Was that investigative firm Fusion GPS, or did the DNC hire another firm to peddle anti-Trump information to Obama's FBI?
I don't know definitively which it is, but I can certainly follow up and get back to you on that.
But it is a question you can answer for me.
I don't know. I have to double check
Okay.
with our folks on that.
And if you couldn't, would that be a case of privacy or something?
No, I just don't know if we've ultimately figured out the answer to that question, because it was in a different field office with different people to have to interview and that sort of thing.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much we went down that road, frankly.
Okay, thank you. I've been asking questions since September 2017 about what kind of defensive briefings the FBI provided to the Trump campaign. The FBI told me its briefings to both campaigns were similar and that it wasn't aware of action that it took as a result. Chairman Johnson and I wrote again to the FBI 2 months ago. We noted that text messages between Strzok and Page indicated that the FBI may have used defensive briefings not to warn the Trump campaign, but to investigate it. 4 questions along this line. Question number 1, would you agree that with respect to the defensive briefings, the Trump campaign's briefings were treated differently than those provided to the Clinton campaign?
If I could, they were called it was not an FBI briefing. The FBI went to a Office of the National Director of National Intelligence briefing. It was a strategic counterintelligence briefing, and I mention that because it precisely wasn't a defensive briefing. It was an intelligence briefing, and they were treated differently in that the agent wrote it up to the file and put the information in the file. The briefings were identical, but the net result was one was for investigative purposes and one was purely for the intelligence briefing.
I think what you said touches on question 2, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In this case, the agency at the Trump campaign briefing documented statements and interactions of Michael Flynn and candidate Trump for the FBI's investigative files. Is it normal for the counterintelligence briefers to document statements and interactions of individuals that they're briefing for investigative purposes?
It was documented in one and not documented in the other, as you said, Senator. And based on what we saw, there's actually no policy on it. But based on the reaction of the current leadership and Director Wray's response, where he underlined the word, "this will not happen" going forward, I think it's pretty clear what his state of mind is on that, that this should not have occurred.
Question number 3, did the FBI make any investigative use of the information garnered in the defense briefing, for example, to inform its later interview with Michael Flynn?
So I don't know definitively whether that did occur, but that was certainly the stated purpose for the agent being present.
Okay. Lastly, campaigns place trust in the FBI to provide an environment of cooperation and honest assessments about the risk of foreign threats. How can the FBI repair that trust after abusing the briefing process?
Well, that's where we make the recommendation. We think the FBI has to clearly state what its policy is. It does these kind of strategic briefings, as the chairman mentioned, for members of Congress, for private citizens. companies when they get attacked
You want to go?
on their computer systems, for example, for transition purposes, as was the case here. And there needs to be clear guidance and rules so that those getting the briefings understand.
Okay. On another point, according to your report, Bruce Orr told the FBI that Steele's reporting had gone to the Clinton campaign November 2016. By January 11, 2017, key investigators knew the dossier was prepared in part for the DNC. And by February and March 2017, quote unquote, it was broadly known in the FBI and by senior Justice Department officials that Den Simpson was working for the Democrat Party. How many people in the FBI and DOJ knew that the Steele dossier was political opposition research funded by the Democrats, and who were they, and did any of them approve information in the FISA or any of its renewals while knowing who was paying for it?
So on the FBI side, as we lay out in the report, it's page 258 forward, there were a number of people who knew. It's challenging, getting back to the chairman's question, to know precisely what was known at the very highest levels of the FBI and when, the director, deputy director levels, because of the lack of any, direct record of entire briefings. But there certainly was much information, as we lay out here, known at the FBI. At the Justice Department, much of that information was not known. In fact, one of the concerns we note in the information about what Mr. Orr did is Mr. Orr was passing along this information from Mr. Steele to the FBI. That information was not then being given back by the FBI to the Justice Department. So the people, the colleagues of Mr. Orr's at the Justice Department were approving and reviewing these FISAs didn't know that their colleague had passed along that information to the FBI.
Thank you.
We'll go with Senator Lee, then we'll break for lunch and come back at 1 o'clock, and we'll go vote. Okay?
Thank you. Mr. Howard, it's good to see you again, and I've read an awful lot of IG reports in my years here. Am I correct that when the Justice Department or a component disagrees with or has comments about filing an IG report, the general practice is to provide you with a written response to publish along with your report? Is that correct?
That's correct, and we would always include that in our appendix to our reports.
And my staff looked at 797 Inspector General reports filed since your tenure began. They found only 36 reports where the Justice Department or component contested one or more. How many IG reports under your name involved the Justice Department arguing that in fact it committed more misconduct than your investigation uncovered?
I don't recall that happening before.
I tell you right now, none. And that's why I found it very unusual that Attorney General Barr didn't send you anything to go in the report. He just went to the television cameras to talk about it. There is a lot about the personal text messages involved in your 2018 report involving an FBI lawyer and an agent involved in these investigations, personal animus toward President Trump. You also, didn't you, in your investigation, find pro-Trump, favorable Trump text messages from agents who worked on the Russia investigation, including one that was an expletive-ridden exchange where the agents were enthusiastically talking about Trump's election and their desire to investigate the Clinton Foundation under President Trump. That you found that too, didn't you?
That's correct. That's in the report.
Well, I think it's potentially problematic whether they're pro-Trump or pro-Clinton in their things. I assume the FBI investigators can have strong views on politics, but the question is, does it impact their work?
Exactly right. I think it's very important to keep in mind that while they frankly should never be using their government devices to have political discussions, whether they're working on a sensitive campaign or sensitive matter or not, in our view, and we took the view last year, we laid it out, we were not holding or referring people for performance failures simply because they expressed support or lack of support for a candidate. It was precisely as you indicated.
Thank you.
Connecting it to their
Both
activity.
those that were pro-Trump or pro-Clinton. Thank you. Now, there was one occasion where I think bias did impact one or more Russian works. The FBI appropriately kept quiet about the Trump-Russia investigation during the 2016 election. The same can't be said about the Clinton administration. Rudy Giuliani and others appear to receive highly sensitive leaks from the New York FBI field office, leaks that likely contributed to Director Comey's public announcement that he was reopening the Clinton investigation just days before the election. I asked then Director Comey about these leaks. He said he was investigating. Now, we know the number of these leaks to Mr. Giuliani, which he then ran to the cameras and actually bragged about talking about. What can you tell us about the New York field office's leaks to Rudolph Giuliani and others?
So as we noted publicly last year in our report, we were very concerned about that. We put in the appendix charts showing all the different contacts. And subsequent to that report, and this continues to this day, we are investigating those contacts. We've issued a couple of public summaries so far about people we found violated FBI policy. We have other investigations ongoing that when we conclude that, we will also post summaries of. It's what's proving to be very hard is to prove the actual substance of the communications between the agents and the reporters or the individuals, as you might guess, but we can prove the contacts, and under FBI policy, you need authorization if you're going to disclose information and have certain contacts.
Thank you. One of your central findings is that the FBI's investigation into Russian ties to the Trump campaign was not influenced by political bias. Is that correct?
The opening of the investigation we found was not connected to any of the biased texts that we identified.
Well, now there's an elephant in the room, maybe a herd of them. At the President's direction, the Attorney General has been combing Europe to find any support for fringe theories to cast doubts on the Russia investigation. I'm not clear what legitimate law enforcement purposes serves. How do we know that politics is not driving the Barr-Durham investigation?
I'm not sure how anybody knows what you don't know, or unless you do an investigation or you review it or somebody looks through, as we did, for example, here, 1 million records in an exhaustive effort.
But you would agree that Justice Department investigations have to be free of improper political motivation?
Absolutely, 1,000%. I did public corruption investigations. I ran the public corruption unit in the Southern District of New York. You had to be straight down the yellow line in the middle of the road on anything you touched.
Does it concern you the Attorney General is running around Europe to find any kind of theories that might cast doubt on the Russian investigation?
I think you have to ask the Attorney General about those meetings. I don't know what those meetings were about, and obviously haven't done any investigating.
I am concerned because you did not follow the procedure normally if they have a question or a disagreement with the Inspector General's report by letting you know before the report comes out so you can include and would include any disagreement. Instead, just went to the press with it. And think about when Glenn Fine investigated the politically motivated firing of 9 U.S. attorneys during the Bush administration. He said that department leaders abdicated their responsibility to ensure that prosecutorial decisions would be based on the law, the evidence, and department policy, not political pressure. In this case, for the first time, questions were not sent to you by the Attorney General, but instead given to the press. Is that correct? In your experience?
I don't know of another situation where we didn't get those attached in our appendix to our report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee.
And thank you for your comments about Senator Lee and myself.
Absolutely. We will adjourn, recess until 1 o'clock.
All right, folks, and stay here worldwide with us on News Now. We're going to replay some of the biggest moments that happened within these last hour and 45 minutes. We appreciate everyone joining us on News Now. Remember, we are your source for everything political as we get really going on this road to 2020 coming up next year. We're going to have it all for you. But of course, before the road to 2020, it's more than likely, it's looking like we are going to have a Senate impeachment trial to start the new year in 2020. We invite you to watch that day by day with us, hour by hour, and really minute by minute. So stay with us here on News Now, everybody. We are in a short commercial break on TV, but for all our friends worldwide on YouTube, thank you so much for being part of this great News Now experience. We always appreciate you guys worldwide here on News Now. Thank you again. I'm your host, Mike Page. Always great to be here with you. If you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button. That way you can always be alerted when we are live and worldwide for you right here. And follow me on Twitter at Mike Page Fox 10. I'll share that handle with you in just a moment, everyone. Worldwide on News Now. And you can follow me right here on Twitter at Mike Page Fox 10 there, and you can thank me for providing this coverage here for you, streaming it from Gavel in and Gavel out. It'd be great to have you here and join us and continue that conversation on Twitter as well, everyone. And welcome back, everyone, here to News Now, a very special show for you today as we are featuring this Senate hearing that is really taking the country by storm right now. We have more than 30,000 of you watching on YouTube as well. And thanks to everyone watching, of course, on Fox 10 Extra. We do it every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, right on this channel. So thank you for joining us here. While this hearing is in a break right now, let's show you some of the big highlights from the last hour here on News Now.
This investigation is designed to protect Americans from foreign influence. I want the American people to know there was an effort to affect Hillary Clinton's campaign by foreign actors. The FBI picked up that effort, they briefed her about it, and they were able to stop it. We will be receiving a defensive briefing tomorrow as a committee from the FBI to tell us all about what we should be watching for. And they may be some specific threats against us. I don't know. But I know they're going to brief us to protect us, not to surveil us. And here's what I want every American to know. From the time they opened up Crossfire Hurricane